Hello friends, welcome to a new topic today. Okay, in this chapter let us now learn some points about deformities. Okay, let us now learn some points about deformities. Okay, deformities, if you see, we have different types of deformities which are available. So we can call the deformities as the first term. We will have two words for deformities, if you remember, like cubitus varus or cubital valgus, coxa vara, coxa valgus, right, like that. We have two words. So if you see the first term, if it is cubitus, if you see the first term, cubitus is called as elbow. If there is manus term, then that is wrist, coxa is hip, genu is called as knee, and hallux is metatarsophalangeal joint is called as hallux. Okay, when the part of the limb is moving distal to the joint deviated, then we call it as medially. If it is deviated medially, we call it as varus. If it is deviated laterally, we call it as valgus. So let me just draw the picture for one. I will draw for genu. If you see for knee, if this is the knees were like this, then what do you call these as? This is okay, I remember like this, it has a L in it, right? So this is valgus. Okay, according to the definition also, if you see, when the part of the limb is distal to the joint deviated laterally, when this part of the limb is lateral, see, if this here the limb is laterally deviated, right? Next, if you see varus is something like this. Okay, so this you call it as varus. Okay, this is genu valgus, this is genu varus. Next, what is important here is normal parameters we will see. So if you see the normal parameters, for the normal parameters, always elbow is at least 5 to 15 degrees. Elbow has at least 5 to 15 degrees of varus. Okay, if you see elbow, it has at least 5 to 15 degrees of varus is present in the elbow. Then, so we have cubital varus and cubitus valgus. So cubitus varus is seen in fracture of supracondylar fracture of humerus, whereas cubitus valgus is seen in fracture lateral condyle of humerus. I remember like this: varus, so supracondylar fracture of humerus; valgus, so it is lateral condyle of fracture of humerus. So if you see, if you have varus, R for supracondylar fracture of humerus, L for lateral condyle of humerus, you can remember it like this. Okay, then if you see, for that is for elbow joint. Then for hip joint, what is important in hip joint is this neck shaft angle. So if you see, this is the neck shaft angle. Based on the neck shaft angle, you can divide it whether it is varus or valgus. Okay, in elbow, most of the time in our normal elbow itself, we have 5 to 10 degrees of valgus is present. Especially this 5 to 10 degrees of valgus is called as carrying angle. This carrying angle is a little more in females in order to accommodate the hips, wider hips. Anyways, so in hip joint we have neck shaft angle. This neck shaft angle, this is the neck, this is the axis of the neck, this is the axis of the shaft. The angle which is between the axis of neck and axis of shaft is called as neck shaft angle. Okay, this neck shaft angle, normally it is between 120 to 135 degrees. Okay, if this neck shaft angle decreases, then we call it as coxa vara. When do you call something as coxa vara? If this neck shaft angle decreases. You see, if the neck shaft angle is less than 120, then we are calling it as coxa vara. So what are the examples of coxa vara? Coxa vara include, we have these following examples. We have neck of the femur, rickets or fibrodysplasia seen in coxa vara. So coxa vara, we have mainly these following examples. Coxa vara is when this angle decreases, then we have this coxa vara. Here the examples are neck of the femur, rickets, fibrous dysplasia. Okay, if this angle will increase, think that if this angle increases, then we call it as coxa valga or coxa valgus. Okay, this coxa valgus we call it whenever the angle increases. So this is coxa valga, which is more than, if the angle is more than 135 degrees Celsius, then we call it as coxa valga. So what is the example of coxa valga? Coxa valgus is seen in fracture Gardner's classification for fracture of neck of femur. In Gardner's classification, you see this coxa valga seen in fracture neck of femur. Okay, so this is about the hip joint. Okay, then if you see knee joint is very important. If you see in knee joint, at birth we have genu varum, that is around 10 to 15 degrees. At birth everyone will have genu varum at 10 to 15 degrees. From by the time the baby reaches 6 to 12 months, there will be maximum genu varum. From 14 to 22 months, there will be neutral angulation and genu valgum starts. Okay, from at birth there will be genu varum at 10 to 15 degrees. From 6 to 12 months, there will be maximum genu varum. From 14 to 22 months, there will be neutral angulation and genu valgus starts. From 3.5 to 4 years, you will see maximum genu valgus, that is 10 to 15 degrees. You see maximum genu valgus. Then from 7 to 8 years, this genu valgus reduces and becomes normal, and you will see 6 to 8 degrees genu valgus being formed. Okay, now this genu valgus reduces and it almost becomes normal, that is you have only 6 to 8 degrees of genu valgus is seen by the age of 7 to 8 years. Okay, so this is the normal pathology. So if you see, I'll just draw a diagram for this so that it becomes easier. So if you see from birth, I think I'll write here. Yeah, I'll write here. Okay, so this is the timeline from birth. Okay, in birth we have 10 to 15 degrees, okay, of genu varum. 10 to 15 degrees of genu varum is present at the birth, and from there this genu varum will increase. Okay, by the age of 6 to 12 months, this genu varum becomes maximum size. So there will be maximum genu varum. Okay, that is still 6 to 12 months. Now from 6 to 12 months, there will be neutral angulation. From 14 to 22 months, there is neutral angulation. Okay, then from this we have something called as, okay, then from this you have something called as genu valgus will start. Okay, this genu valgus will start. Now from here we have genu valgus, which starts and increases, okay, and becomes maximum genu valgus. So this is genu valgus, okay, which is maximum, that is 10 to 15 degrees, is present at 3.5 to 4 years. At 3.5 to 4 years, you see maximum genu valgus, that is 10 to 15 degrees. And then now it has been done. Now from 7 to 8 years, this again becomes neutral, normal, and there will be only 6 to 8 degrees of genu valgus. So this is normal changes that occur in the knee. Okay, so when do we call that there is genu varum or Bowlegs? Genu varum or Bowlegs are mainly seen in rickets, osteoarthritis of knee most commonly, and this genu varum is also seen in Blount's disease. So genu varum or bow leg is seen in rickets, osteoarthritis of knee, and Blount's disease. You see this genu varum or bow legs. Then we have this genu valgum or knock knee is seen mainly in rickets. So genu varum is seen in 3 diseases. One, rickets, osteoarthritis, and Blount's disease, whereas genu valgum or knock knee is seen only in rickets. So either it is genu varum or genu valgum or any type of malgum or varum, the only way to treat the disease is doing an osteotomy is the main important way of treating the disease. Fine. Next. Okay, the next important thing is about the development. So here if you see the development and growth of long bone, if you see this development and growth of long bone, for this we have 2 types of ossification. One, we have endochondral ossification. Second, we have intramembranous ossification. In endochondral ossification, we have a preformed cartilage which leads to bone formation. Then in intramembranous ossification, there is highly vascularized sheath which directly forms from the bone. Okay, in intramembranous ossification, there is highly formed sheath, vascular sheath, which is formed directly from the bone. Okay, that is intramembranous ossification. Okay, so we have 2 types of ossification. One is endochondral ossification. The second is intramembranous ossification. Right? Next we have to learn about growth. The growth is again of 2 types. We have 2 main types of growth. One which is called as appositional growth. What is this appositional growth? Appositional growth, here you see increase in length. This is mainly seen in the epiphysis. Here you see increase in the length, and here the growth occurs in epiphysis. That is appositional growth. And the second type of growth is interstitial growth. In this interstitial growth, the increase occurs in the width of the bone, and this mainly occurs in meta and diaphysis. So you have growth 2 types. You have appositional growth and interstitial growth. In appositional growth, there is increase in length of the growth that occurs in epiphysis. So if you see, if this is the bone, so at the epiphysis you have appositional growth, where you see increase in the length of the bone, whereas here in the metaphysis and diaphysis you have interstitial growth, where you see increase in width of the bone. Okay, so these are the 2 different types of growth. Then if you see, what about the regulation of cells? In the regulation of cells for growth, if you see, this is the thing. What is happening here is we have osteoblast progenitor cell. Okay, this is the first thing, is osteoblast progenitor cell. This osteoblast progenitor cell, this has a rank ligand, right? This rank L, RANKL proteins, these will activate the osteoblastic progenitor cells. So these osteoblastic progenitor cells will lead to the production of mononuclear osteoblast. Many of these mononuclear osteoblasts will fuse together to form an osteoblast. This osteoblast progenitor will now activate the growth factors ICF and FGF, fibroblast growth factor, and BMP, and all these will again activate the osteoblasts. This osteoblast will again lead to Rankel ligand, and this process will go again and again. So there is something called as osteoprotegerin. This osteoprotegerin binds to the Rankel ligand, and this will form osteoblast progenitor cell. Okay, this will inhibit osteoblast progenitor cell. Now we will see what are the associated pathogens with the osteoblast. So if you see the associated pathologies, we have cells plus osteoid. In the bone we have cells and we have proteins. Okay, and we also have osteoid. So see, if what does this sentence mean is, if we have cells, okay, in the bone, if we have cells and along with that protein, what is the protein? Protein here is nothing but collagen, because bone is mainly composed of collagen. If we combine cells with protein, there is formation of osteoid. Okay, to this osteoid, if we add the mineral, what is the mineral that we have to add in this situation? Here we will have to add calcium. So if we add calcium to this osteoid, so this leads to the formation of bone, right? So this mineral, that is calcium, phosphorus and vitamin D, will tell us about the about the mineralization. What does serum calcium, potassium and phosphorus will tells us about the mineralization. And how are you going to estimate the osteoid? Osteoid is mainly estimated by tetracycline activity. Based on the tetracycline activity, we can estimate the osteoid. Then let us now learn a few points about the cell markers. Okay, these cell markers are also very important. So if you see the cell markers, we have two types of cell markers. One, we have bone formation cell markers and we have bone destruction cell markers. First we will see bone formation cell markers. These bone formation cell markers include, we have bone specific alkaline phosphatase. This is bone specific alkaline phosphatase. We have procollagen type 1C and type NC. Okay, procollagen type 1C and type 2, and we have osteocalcin. So we have three main markers of bone formation. What are they? Bone specific alkaline phosphatase, procollagen and osteocalcin. Next, what are the markers of bone resorption? Markers of bone resorption include, we have N and C chain of telopeptide. We have N and C chain of telopeptide. Then we have deoxypyridinoline. Okay, in bone resorption we have N and C chain of telopeptide. We have dihydroxypyridinoline. Then we have hydroxyproline and hydroxylysine. So these are the ones which you see in bone resorption. In bone resorption we have N and C chain of telopeptide. We have deoxypyridinoline, hydroxyproline and hydroxylysine, and also tartarate resistant acid phosphatase as the bone resorption markers. So what are the markers of bone resorption? We have N and C chain of telopeptides, deoxypyridinoline, hydroxyproline and hydroxylysine. Tartarate resistant acid phosphatase are the main bone resorption markers. Then what does the PTH show? PTH or parathyroid or parathormone will increase the calcium and decreases phosphate, whereas vitamin D is also involved in calcium regulator and phosphate regulator. This vitamin D will increase the calcium and phosphate, whereas calcitonin will decrease the calcium. So what is the regulation of calcium and phosphate metabolism? Includes mainly, we have 4 hormones which are associated with it. One is parathormone, vitamin D and calcitonin. Okay, so this is about the main some important points about the general anatomy, a part of anatomy, and also one-liners of the bone. Thank you guys for watching my lecture. Thank you.